Hi, welcome to Indie Wine Podcast, episode 18. I recently sat down with Chik Brenneman at Baker Family Wines in West Sacramento. Chik is the managing partner and winemaker, his business partner being Dusty Baker, former manager of the San Francisco Giants, amongst other teams, and current manager of the Houston Astros. We discussed Chik's transition into wine. Like many others, winemaking is his second career, working at smaller wineries in the Sierra foothills, to working at the giant Woodbridge production facility, how he started teaching at UC Davis, and how Dusty and him came to start a winery. Hope you enjoy. Here we go. Yeah, how did you get interested in wine? What started your journey in it?
Boy, I like to say this one here just for it to be a little bit animated, is that it was a midlife crisis.
Okay.
That didn't involve fast women or cars or vice versa. I was a clinical laboratory scientist coming out of college. So, we go back a few years where I was an environmental biology major in the early 1980s. And I wound up in an emergency room one night with a big cut on my hand, and I'm sitting there, senior in college at Humboldt State University, and couldn't find a job. Just the economy was so depressed in the early 80s and couldn't find a job. And I'm sitting there going, what can I do with this biology degree that I'm going to get? Mm-hmm. And then, so I was just sitting in the emergency room waiting for them to suture up. And I said, well, what about something in the medical field? And so I went ahead and I transferred schools to Sacramento State. Graduated from Sacramento State and got an internship down in the Bay Area Valley Medical Center and got my license for clinical laboratory science. And so I worked in hospital labs, reference laboratory, veterinary labs. And I just sort of, by the time I was 35, I was like, I just don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Okay. And actually, I'm married to a now retired clinical laboratory scientist. Okay. So it was just a little intense, how's your day at the hospital? Well, how was your day at the reference lab? Well, hers was fine because she got to leave after 8 hours, but I was in middle management and I could not leave until the work was done. Okay. So I was just burning out at it. Mm-hmm. And so came home from work one day and she was working PM shift, and I waited up, and she knew something was up because she knew how early I had to get up. And I just sort of said, I gotta change. I just can't do this anymore. Well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't know. The guy that lives kitty corner from us across the backyards, he and I brewed beer together. And he also worked in one of the units of the lab that I managed. I was giving him a ride home, and Ron says, hey, why don't you go to UC Davis and get a degree in enology? It'd be right up your alley. Yeah. So Polly just in her calm way and her conservative way, because I've always been the person that's job jumped. And she said, oh, okay, we can take a look at that. And so, we looked into it and said, okay, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. I can just go out and get a job in a wine laboratory, or I can maybe go back and do the academic side of it. And we've been academics, and so, well, let's just do that. So I applied for the master's program at UC Davis. This was in about 1993, 94 or so, and was accepted. Reluctantly, I think. Okay. There's a backstory to that because I went on to actually manage the program later. Right. And so, but then I graduated, but I had zero experience. And I went on, I had some opportunity to work for, the first guy I worked for remained nameless. It was, I learned, because he said God always made wine, but God's not a very good winemaker. And so I went to work for Ben Zeitman and Katie Quinn at Amador Foothill up there. And the beauty of working for them is that I was the sole employee on a 40-acre vineyard and winery, and they're absolutely passionate about what they do, or what they did at the time. They're retired now. But they took me under their wing, knew that I didn't have a lot of experience, but they also knew that, you get the older employee
Hmm.
and you're going to get the maturity that goes along with it. And so they showed me the ropes, and I worked for them for almost 3 years. I like to say that I'm the longest lived employee that Ben could hang on to.
Did you find yourself out you were working in the vineyard also there,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
purely in the winery?
No, it was grapes to bottle with them. Pruning, spraying, vine training, work in the field crews. I learned, some more or less good and bad words in Spanish. And then also working with Katie in the cellar and, blending and actually they'd leave for Italy for, 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time. And I would just run the place.
Okay.
And, pretty much zero experience, but they had a pretty good system there.
Hmm.
So I did that for a couple of years, 3 years almost. And then it was, I reluctantly decided to move on. But I wanted to get some other experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because that's what I think that all young winemakers should do is go out and test the waters other places. So went to work for Easton Wines, Terra Rouge and Easton Wines, worked there for about a year. And I really like to think, well, then the job at Woodbridge came up, work in the cellar in the foothills didn't really pay a lot at that time.
Sure.
And so we knew that we would never get rich in the wine industry, but we needed to pay the bills a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so that's when I saw the job as a production lab manager at Woodbridge. And they were looking for somebody that had winemaking experience, but also had extensive laboratory experience.
Okay. So you were able to apply your previous life to that.
Yeah. And so I came in and I basically automated the laboratory there. I mean, when I started looking at some of the manual work that they did and some of the expenses that they had, and I said, there's a lot less expensive way to do this. And I have the experience and I'll bet my job on it.
Okay.
So, but I really like to think that it was those three experiences, working for the small, the medium, and then, the very large winery, that helped hone my winemaking skills. But then I can't tell you how much I learned in teaching winemaking when I went to the university.
Yeah. How long were you at Woodbridge?
I was at Woodbridge for right about 3.5 years or so.
Okay.
And then I Constellation purchased the Mondavi Corporation, and I was about a year into that. I was taking my unit through the ISO certifications because that was something that the international companies need, and I had a lot of experience with that previous in the clinical side. So I basically was started to be recruited by the faculty at UC Davis to come over and be their winemaker. And so at the time we were still in the old facility. Mm-hmm. And I kept on asking the question, what's happening with the new institute? Because it was one of those things where it's a nice carrot to see that, that I'm not going to be stuck in this old antiquated 1939 vintage winery there. Yeah. And then so a couple of years pass after I'd started there, and we got the go ahead to start planning the Mondavi Institute winery.
Okay.
And then so I was at UC Davis from 2006 to when I retired in 2019. And like I say, I think that one of the greatest achievements that I had was helping plan and execute the design for, at that time, was the world's most advanced winery.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So and then it's funny is that people go, wow, you've designed the world's most advanced winery there. And I said, well, wine's not about technology in a lot of cases. Wine is about gathering your experiences and making the best. And that's what I learned a lot of the passion and the flavor profiles that I really liked from Ben and Katie. I didn't really like their choice of cooperage, but I loved Bill's choice of cooperage because he had expensive taste, so he used all French oak. But also in, coming to light here at Baker Family Wines, being a small winery and being so subject from vintage to vintage changes in the vineyards, the experience that I had at Woodbridge where the winemaking team would blend for consistency.
Right.
So you have blends that you can build on, but you have millions of gallons to do this with. I only have thousands of gallons here. So that's why why Dusty and I have come along and decided that, sometimes our signature blends are going to be the best ones and the ones that we can support and be more consistent from year to year.
What does the winemaker at UC Davis, what does that job entail? Is it mostly a teaching position or research or a little of everything?
It's a little bit of everything there. One is from the teaching side of it is acting as a mentor to the students, coming through, taking on some interns annually, giving them on-the-job training. That was one of the criticisms that the university had in the old facility is that the UC Davis grads came out very, very book smart. And that's what I thought I did too. I mean, it was Ben and Katie taking me under their wing that really taught me a lot more about winemaking and schlepping hoses and stuff. And so that's what I aimed to do on the teaching side in the new facility, but also participating in the research and understanding the researchers' needs and, basically providing the facility that could control for the variables that they were trying to, to know what the outcome was of what it would be. And in research, you never try to steer the outcome. In research, you control for as many variables. And then at the end, you evaluate, is there a difference? So I wore a lot of hats. I also, being a privately funded facility, I also did a lot of development work.
Okay.
I was like a bridge between members of industry that wanted to give to the university and the faculty and the college development teams there, that they would come to me, the potential donors could come to me and they say, hey, we want to give you something. What do you need? So I'd look at the program. I'd look at, say, in the case with Boucher Vaseline out of France, a company that at the time wanted to partner with UC Davis, but they didn't know exactly how to make it happen. And because within the university system, there's things that are called intellectual property. So there was some hangups there, but finally in the end, myself and somebody from Boucher Vaseline just sort of broke the rules, and we wound up bringing in some equipment at a very, very reduced cost.
Okay.
But that was the equipment that the program needed to take teaching to the next level there.
Yeah.
So that was the development side of it there, is just, and then over the years it became, when working with the development people, it became that people would come to me, we'd go to the board of visitors and fellows meetings. People would come to me and say, what do you need? And how much money will it take? And so that's how we basically facilitated and made that program, world class and sort of, moved it into the next, into the modern winemaking world, because it was not very modern when you're working with, essentially carboys and plastic buckets and such. And
yeah, it's like large scale home winemaking.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were at UC Davis until, I'm sorry, you say 2019?
Yeah, 2019 is when I retired. Yeah.
How did you meet up with Dusty, and how did Baker Family Wines start? What's the connection there?
Well, that goes back to the Woodbridge days.
Okay.
So Dusty was friends with Michael Mondavi. I guess they went fishing or hunting or something like that. And Michael had asked Dusty to be, and he was then, I think he was manager for the San Francisco Giants at the time.
Okay.
If, he wanted to be a brand ambassador.
Okay.
Okay, consumer brand ambassador. Something, you get invited to dinner and you talk up the wines and, and such. And so Dusty did that. And so he came to Woodbridge one day, and my team, they were in charge of what I used to call the celebrity tastings.
Okay. Yeah.
Where they'd just have some people come in, and then a celebrity like Dusty or a local, politician or something like that comes in and just talks and chats. And my staff hated it.
Okay.
And then so one day my key person comes in, and she always did stuff, but it was just like I would hear the complaints, but she goes, "I'll do the tasting today." And I looked at her and I said, "Kathy, I smell a rat. Who is it?" Because I had not looked at the schedule. And she says, "It's Johnny Baker." And I said, "Who?" She goes, "Johnny Baker. Dusty Baker." Yeah. And I said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I know who that is," kind of thing. I said, "So no complaints after this." Okay. So as a courtesy, I go in and I introduce our staff to Dusty and the people there and say that they'll take care of you and stuff. So, so we just met a couple of times during that period there. And a few years later, so there was another guy who was the vice president of international marketing that I was pretty close to. He and I went through employee orientation together, and he was always, he was a good friend of Dusty's. And Dusty called Rodney and says, "Hey, I want to put this little vineyard in on my property. And do you know anybody who can do it?" Rodney goes, "Well, he's left Constellation, but he's at the university now. His name is Chik Brenneman, and you should give him a call. Because if anybody can do it, Chik can do it." So I get this cold call one day on my office phone at UC Davis, and it's a guy leaving. It was a voicemail.
Okay.
and it was like this guy telling me he's Dusty Baker, and I'm going, "Oh yeah, right." Well, 312 area code. I grew up in Chicago, so maybe it is him, and because he would have been with the Cubs at the time. So we talked, we finally connected, and so we put in this little vineyard on his property. It was just supposed to be a gentleman's vineyard. And we started making the wine off of it in about 2010, and Dusty's just giving the wine away. I mean, it was home wine. I mean, I was a home winemaker at the time. I mean, I worked professionally at the university, but I just did home winemaking. And so Dusty's giving it away, and next vintage comes around, it's even better. Next vintage comes around, it's even better. And people are sitting there going, "Dusty, where can I buy this wine?" And Dusty would sit there and go, "I can't sell it. Here's another bottle." "No, we want to buy this wine." So he, all tongue in cheek, then he starts asking me, "Hey, let's form a company." And I said, "No, Dusty, I've got a day job. I know what it takes to run a winery." And he says, "No, come on." So I turned him down 3 times
Okay.
And he kept on bugging me about it. And I said no. And then finally my wife, Polly, and I talked about it. Well, it's not every day you get a name like Dusty Baker.
Yeah.
So I went back and we struck a deal. And the deal was it was going to be a partnership.
Okay.
It would be grassroots, Dusty, you write a check for this. I'm going to write a check for this. I'll take care of all the permits. And so that was in 2012.
Okay.
And so, but we needed to find a place to have a winery. And well, I live here in Sacramento. He's in Granite Bay. And I said, the easiest thing to do is we just want to keep it small so we can sell it. So we're just going to see if I can bond my garage.
Oh,
and in the Land Park neighborhood. And so I was having a lot of trouble with the planning commission with the city of Sacramento. And he said that he would, I called him up one day and I said, "How well do you know Kevin Johnson?" And who was then mayor at the time.
Right.
And he goes, "If I made a call to Kevin Johnson, it's going to cost me $1 million." That's when Mayor Johnson was trying to keep the Kings, Sacramento Kings. And so, so we had to find another place. And so that's where Treasure Island came up. One of my students in 2009, Danny Sullivan, I mentored him. And he managed the cellar and worked as a consulting winemaker at Treasure Island Winery in the Bay. And they were essentially a cooperative that offered up alternating proprietorships So in the alternative proprietorship is where you work under a umbrella bond, but within that bond, you have your own bond and you're responsible for your own winemaking, for your own records. It's a much better option for those that have the passion, the expertise, because you control your own winemaking. It's not like delivering grapes to a cellar or to a custom crush facility,
right,
and getting a bottle of wine at the end, and you sort of really don't know what's going on in between. So that worked out really well for a few years. As the company started growing, we it became all day Saturday rather than just a few hours on Saturday.
Yeah.
Became all day Saturday. Then it became all day Saturday, dinner in a hotel and part of the day Sunday. And then it turned into an entire weekend, and then turned into eating dinner in Sacramento on Sunday night at 9 or 10 o'clock in your pajamas. And so that's when we decided to start thinking about moving. And that was in 2018 or so.
Okay.
So from basically 2012 to 2018, I was pulling double duty, working the university 50, 60 hours a week, and, trying to, build this company. And Dusty helped when he could, but of course, he's in professional baseball. And when he leaves in February, he doesn't come back until, well, we hope November.
Yeah. Can't take many days off though during the season.
And he can't, but he would be here if he could. I mean, he'd help prune the vineyard. He'd want to get in a bottling session before he went back to spring training. So, then it was in about 2018 or so that we just decided that we needed to move the wine closer.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said between 90 miles between you and your wines. And sometimes it just was a long drive for just a short amount of work, or a long drive for a lot of work and then getting stuck in traffic. So that's when we decided to start looking here in Sacramento and also in West Sacramento. And West Sacramento was very, very amenable to trying to attract Dusty Baker into their business community.
Great.
And so we struck a deal on this space here on Industrial Boulevard. Of course, when you open in November 2019, and COVID happens in 2020. It was a rough start here, but we made it work. I mean, we had to retool, we had to rethink a lot of things. So we came out of COVID, and then we formed this shared tasting area with the craft brewery that was across the parking lot. Now we basically do beer and wine under one roof, and we maintain our licenses, but keep the beer and the wine separate.
Okay.
And given, my knowledge of winemaking, we do want to keep them separate.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Were those first wines that was Syrah, the vineyard that you planted with Dusty? Is that right? Before you started the winery together?
Yeah. So when Dusty asked me to help him with the vineyard, and I said, well, what variety do you want? And he says, well, I really like Cabernet Sauvignon. And I said, well, it's too hot for Cabernet Sauvignon in Granite Bay. So you're going to grow Syrah.
Okay.
And he goes, well, am I going to like it? And I said, well, it's all about the right variety on the right site. And so, but I think that you're going to like it.
Yeah.
So the first vintages was Syrah, and then quite frankly, anything that we could get our hands on.
Okay.
I went back to Ben and Katie at Amador Foothill and says, what do you have surplus? And they said, well, we've got some Sangiovese as surplus. We can do that. Let's see. Well, we can call Tom down the street and see if he can spare some Zinfandel. So it was just really basically whatever we could get our hands on.
Yeah.
So that was 2013 vintage was Syrah and Sangiovese. Then in 14, we tried to get the Sangiovese again, and we actually did, but I wasn't pleased with the fruit.
Okay.
It was just that Ben and Katie had sold the property, and so it was under different ownership there, and just wasn't pleased with that. And then there was just some challenges, personal challenges in 2014 that, we went from 140 cases in 13 to about 70 in 2014.
Okay.
just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And and that's the honest to God truth. And then in 15, started talking with Danny at Treasure Island, and he says, "Hey, I know some growers up in Russian River, and they'll have some extra fruit." Mm-hmm. So some other things started coming up in the Sierra foothills, and the Russian River fruit. We could get it for a good price because a lot of people at the Treasure Island facility would just go in on a truckload of fruit.
Okay.
We'd all process it differently and run it our own ways.
Yeah.
So that's when we started bringing in more Syrah from the Russian River Valley,
okay.
Zinfandel from Russian River, and what else did we? Oh, we started bringing in Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc for whites because we needed to do whites. Mm-hmm. And so initially the Sauvignon Blanc came out of Mendocino County, pretty high elevation vineyard in Cloverdale Peak is where that came from. Mm-hmm. And then, but the Semillon was coming out of Nevada County. And then it started turning to Amador County again for those two white varieties, but it became really difficult to get.
Okay.
And so, and when you're the third pick, it makes it even more difficult.
Sure.
So you're the guy at the end that wants 2 to 3 tons.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we got it and sometimes we didn't. But so in the last 3 or 4 years, we've developed some really nice regular relationships with growers and producers and started bringing in a lot of what I like to say is grapes and wine that are grown on the right site under the right conditions. Mm-hmm. So right now, we've got a regular relationship with Pinot grower out of Russian River Valley, Pinot out of Santa Lucia Highlands, 2 remarkably wonderful wines that are really quite different. The Russian River is going to be on the more earthy side and more Burgundian, got that roasted beet character in the finish, whereas the Santa Lucia Highlands is going to be nice, bright, fruity. And we're actually making a rosé as well out of that. And there's also a sparkling rosé in the pike here.
Oh, very cool.
With that same fruit. So we've developed that relationship there. We've actually moved the Sauvignon Blanc program away from Amador County just because it's too hard to get Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. And we're pulling the Sauvignon Blanc out of Quepé Valley. Of all places.
Yeah.
The Ochadehe tribal nation actually farms, several hundred acres up there. Yeah. Not just in grapes, but also in other crops as well. And so the same guy that turned us onto the fruit in Santa Lucia Highlands manages that vineyard up there too. So we're pulling that from there. And the Semillon's coming out of Clarksburg region. And we've also just recently brought in Chenin Blanc as well.
Okay. Also from Clarksburg.
Yeah.
I assume.
So we've sort of, morphed over the years.
Yeah.
As far as varieties and what we can do as a small producer. And I think the wines speak for themselves and the growers come back and say, I really like that wine you produced. Do you want to buy some more fruit? Mm-hmm. So I feel blessed that now at least for the Russian River vineyard, the Russian River Pinot vineyard, that is that, we've come from that third pick to actually be, you've got first choice.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What do you look for in the vineyard and the farming when you're looking to possibly work with the fruit?
Somebody that working with a grower that understands that we're all about quality, because I was always taught if we're not going to make good wine, why bother? And so it's about quality and their care. They've got a good IPM program. They're not, for lack of a better description, nuking the vineyard with chemicals. They're trying to work with the land, but of course reacting to what the fruit is, showing them throughout the course of the growing season. And somebody who's not concerned about tonnage, but they are concerned about quality.
Okay. And
so most of the vineyards that we work with, the Zinfandel vineyard and the Cabernet that's coming out of Sierra foothills, that's an all organically grown vineyard. The grower's grown that fruit for 30 or 40 years. He knows his property. And so all I need to do is say, Jonathan, when do I pick it up? because I know that he's going to deliver, and I'm never disappointed.
Yeah.
So really, and it boils down to, finding the right variety and the right site, because it's not all about AVAs for me, because you can have some stellar wines off of AVAs that really, don't have a lot of cachet,
Sure.
or you can have some really dog wines off of AVAs that have a lot of cachet.
Yeah.
And so it's really looking for the quality that the grower has the passion, and then we can translate the grower's passion into the wine, because that just makes our job a lot easier.
How has your winemaking changed over the years on a personal level? I guess more so personal than the Baker family, but how has your winemaking style changed over the years? Do you think it has at all, or
I think it
how's that
has
evolved?
Yeah, it's evolved. I mean, I like to call our my wine styles more Eurocentric, more acid forward, and that's one of the challenges in the California, agricultural environment. In that we've got such a wonderful climate for growing grapes, and in some cases it's too good. And so you see a lot of, drops in acidity. So finding the right vineyard that'll maintain that acidity, finding the right wines to blend in to be able to bring back some of the natural acidity. Barbera is one of our good go-to varieties. We're pulling that out of a vineyard in Loomis. But also, so like I say, if I hadn't said it, more Eurocentric.
Yeah.
We've got that fruit capability. We've got the fruit capability for very, very fruity wines, or very, true to type wines in California. But also we've got to back them up with some structure. And that I find through acidity, not necessarily in tannin structure. I like to be, and I've done this now over the last few years, is just, it's not all about pressing every last little drop out of that must. I mean, it's more or less going through, say, a dejuicing process.
Okay, so just lighter press cycles.
Lighter press cycles, maybe for a little bit longer, but then tasting those press fractions and saying, okay, no, this goes a different direction. We'll hang on to it, but it may get blended back in the long run, but sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
And so then that's where we've come up with maybe those ones that didn't get into the varietal blend. Maybe they're going to go into the proprietary red or white blend, or they're going to go into the walk-off blend in itself. So it's actually just looking at trying to make every batch, worth who's ever got it in their glasses time to put it in their mouth.
How do you approach making a blend?
Well, one of them is consistency and pulling out the previous year's blend.
Okay.
Looking at the varieties that we're going to put in it. The first proprietary red wine blends was a Barbera, Zinfandel, Barbera, Sangiovese, and Petite Syrah.
Okay.
Barbera was really, really integral to that blend. Barbera source dried up for a few years, but we had a lot of that wine, so it wasn't really necessary to actually find it. But then we started looking around for it, couldn't find it, and so we wound up with more Sangiovese and Zinfandel. But it really just took away from the overall complexity of it. It was just a little too strawberry and a little too peppery. Bringing out those. And then so we sought out more Barbera, and we found this vineyard up in Loomis that just has the right wine. Because what I like is the acid structure and the fruitiness of this Barbera. There's not a lot of tannin to it, doesn't need to be. But also, looking at trying to utilize the best components. And then sometimes you're going to have some left over. That's sort of how the walk-off red wine came about. We had a pretty over-extracted Zinfandel. There were some barrels that we could duplicate what we did the previous year, but the other stuff was just a little too, had a little bit too of a raisin type of character to it. Okay. So, but we had that wonderful Syrah that adjacent vineyard, and so we just started blending the Syrah in, and unfortunately, or fortunately for us, because it turned out to be a great wine, people loved it. It took 100% of that Syrah, to to make this walk-off
Yeah.
wine there. And so we approach it from not trying to muscle the wine, but trying to see what the wine can show us, based on what we have. And then the white blends are the same way. Our first proprietary whites was 100% Semillon. And then a couple of years later, the Semillon, it's a good wine. I was content with 100%, but Polly, like the chef that she is, she's there she is in the background, says, this one's just, I'm just not feeling it right here. And so she started blending Sauvignon Blanc into it. And so that's what happened there. And then the next year, a little bit more Sauvignon Blanc got blended into it. And actually for the 2022, we found that a little bit of Chenin added a little bit of that European steeliness that Chenin Blanc can do. And so we really liked it, and it's lighter, it's lower alcohol, 13% or so. So those are some of the other things that we look for in the winemaking side. It's trying to, we love going to Europe and drinking wine because we can get up and walk away from a table.
Yeah. So you said 1 year you dropped down to about 75 cases, but how many cases is Baker family up to now approximately?
About 1,500 cases right now. Yeah. And most of it is out through the tasting room, but with Dusty's success in the Houston market, we are sending wine to Houston. Inventories got dangerously low.
Okay.
I had to take the web store down because it was just, it was like, I was so fearful that I wouldn't have any wines here in the tasting room.
Okay. And
we were just trying to put in the time to get things bottled. But once again, we don't try to muscle the wine through. We were waiting for the wines to say, bottle me. And so we finally got to that point. And not all of them got bottled because some of the barrels just weren't ready. And so, the whites were ready. I mean, we really try to put the whites into barrel by about 6 months aging. They've had enough racking, enough little micro oxygenation so that we know that we're not going to get any trouble in the bottle with any kind of, things that can come up in bottles.
Sure. So your production levels kind of stabilized a bit for that, or are you still kind of growing?
We've stabilized as far as what we can do here in this facility in West Sacramento. We're growing in the Houston market. We're probably going to have to address some type of increased production. We'll see how things go. And where Dusty decides to land himself. Hopefully, I don't know if he's going to continue on or he's, if they get the World Series this year, is he going to come be sent national television going, well, let's make it 3.
Yeah.
I don't know. But no, that's in the back of our minds as far as growing. We are sort of in an expansion phase as far as, hiring more people to head up our sales, becoming a little bit more than, Dusty, Polly, and me, bringing in somebody, that can help me more on a day-to-day basis and somebody else that can act between the distributor that we have and here so that we can make sure that, nobody's frustrated that I can't get back to them in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
I wanted to ask you about your, you write a lot for Winemaker Magazine and do speeches and some of their judging. And can you tell me a little bit about that? Does that come from your teaching background, you think, or is it just a different way to express yourself?
I always wanted to be a teacher way, way, way back when. And I like to think that I missed the calling early on in life, but I got that opportunity with UC Davis. And right about the time, 2007, 2008 or so, that's when the magazine approached me. A little background on the magazine. It's a magazine about winemaking for amateur and aspiring to go pro winemakers. And it's written by experts in a way that you don't have to discern what's in the scientific journal.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of put in a way, sometimes it can go over people's heads, but I try to do the writing in a way that's very easy reading. There's a story, it's not a third person article. It's more of a first person kind of writing style, but it's a way that I can still give back to the home winemaking community, because that's where I started. I mean, I started as a home winemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so to try to give them as much of my knowledge as possible. And we don't get paid a lot for it. I like to say, if I got fired from all my jobs, I'd get a raise. But no, it's a way to give back, and the home winemaking community is just so enthusiastic, and I try to instill on them is try not to overthink it. We've been making wine for thousands of years, and we didn't have all these fancy chemicals in 5000 BC or anything like that. But you got to aspire to do better. Take notes and just really instill that, don't try to work the wine. So I consider it a nice opportunity, and I'm always willing to give back to folks that just want to, pick my brain.
Yeah.
There's no secrets in winemaking. Come get a little bit different taste of what California can offer. It's my style. I mean, we have a tasting room here in West Sacramento. We're right off of Highway 50. We're at 2568 Industrial Boulevard. You can try your hand at some wines or some really nice beers across the way. And we hope to get the web store open. We are locally available, and stores like Cordy Brothers in East Sacramento, Sheldon Wine Shop, which is this has got to be the most unusual wine shop. You're in good company in there, but it's inside an AM/PM mini market at a gas station. We're there, Aikida's in Auburn. We're in a couple of restaurants here in town, but it's just really limited. But come on in. I mean, this is going to be a winery that if I'm here, or Polly's here, we come out and talk to you. You're not going to get, you will get people behind the bar, but you'll also get us coming out and talking to you. And so, but just come on out. It's you got to try them to like them, and they're not going to be for everybody, but they are worth a try. Food friendly, just like my mentors told me, but they're also nice to quaff on a warm summer evening here in wonderful Sacramento. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to our episode with Chik. He's had quite a varied career so far in wineries of multiple sizes, as well as responsible for teaching many of today's current winemakers at UC Davis, and teaming up with Dusty to make some great single varietal wines as well as blends. You can follow Chik and Baker Family Wines at Baker_family_wines on Instagram, or at bakerfamilywines.com. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening, and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you can tell your wine friends about the podcast too and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too. There's also now a Patreon set up if you feel like supporting the podcast monetarily to hopefully allow for more episodes, more travel, and to help defray other costs. The link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.